that we are sure looking forward to.
We've got live Fox team coverage with Dan Springer in Seattle covering the Clinton campaign, but we begin with Peter Doocy outside Trump Tower in New York City. Pete.
And John, we heard this morning that at some point today, maybe in the next few hours, Donald Trump and his campaign may come forward with evidence backing up his side of these stories, that he never acted inappropriately with any of the women who have come forward to accuse him of wrongdoing, misconduct more than a decade ago.
These unsubstantiated allegations that came from the New York Times and People magazine. Donald Trump yesterday publicly...
5 women.
Yeah, he's categorically denied these. And there will be more evidence coming out that supports his...
That they're making
what evidence is coming out?
Well, the campaign is working on bringing that information out.
This morning, we also have a response from the New York Times, who were threatened with a libel lawsuit yesterday by Trump's lawyers, who think the Times were reckless reporting unverified accuser accounts. The Times says they did check things out, and they did include a response from Trump, so if his team wants to sue them, they'll be ready. And that, quote, if he believes that American citizens had no right to hear what these women had to say, and that the law of this country forces us and those who would dare to criticize him to stand silent or be punished, we welcome the opportunity to have a court set him straight. We are told that despite that denial, despite that basically refusal to correct anything, the Trump team does plan to continue really hitting the media that they think is coordinating with the Clinton campaign. They're calling it now the Clinton machine, as basically a way to help Hillary. The Trump campaign is just going to keep hammering them, and today we expect to hear some more of that from Mr. Trump in North Carolina, which we learned yesterday is a state that they are peeling resources out of Virginia to send to the Tar Heel state, basically to help round up as many early votes as possible. You watch the chess pieces move around. That goes to show how important the Tar Heel state is to Trump. John.
We'll be talking more about that in just a moment. Peter Doocy. Peter, thank you.
While Donald Trump's issues dominate the headlines right now, Hillary Clinton trying to keep a bit of a low profile. As part of her West Coast tour, she is raising money in Seattle today. That city, though, is Bernie Sanders' country, where he dominated in the caucuses earlier this year. Let's check in with Dan Springer. He has more from Seattle. Dan, hello. Are voters now feeling it for Hillary Clinton in Washington State?
A little bit. Good morning, Heather. Seattle has raised more money per capita for Bernie Sanders than any other city, and less than 1% of those donors have given even a nickel to Hillary Clinton. Still, in a poll done a couple of weeks ago, 60% of the Sanders voters here in Washington State say they will support Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump was the choice of just 10% of the Sanders supporters, despite the fact he has held 3 big rallies in Washington and has tried hard to put this blue state in play. But the latest poll has Clinton way out in front in the Evergreen State by a comfortable 16 points. Sanders crushed Clinton in the Democratic caucuses in Washington by a 70-30 margin. He was drawing huge crowds while Clinton barely made an appearance, but Mrs. Clinton apparently does not feel the need to rally that base. While Clinton's unfavorables are high in Washington State, Trump's are off the chart at 63%, and that was in a poll taken before the open mic bust tape. So Hillary Clinton continues to play it safe. Yesterday, she stopped in her campaign office in San Francisco. She also raked in nearly $10 million at 2 California fundraisers. And while in Hollywood, Mrs. Clinton did another friendly interview with Ellen DeGeneres, her 3rd since May. Clinton has rarely put herself in a position to field those tough questions. In recent weeks, she has done a few short press gaggles on her campaign plane, but she's only had 1 true news conference in around 300 days of campaigning. During the Ellen taping, Clinton was trying to avoid the appearance of being overconfident.
I don't want anybody to think this election's over, because it's been so unpredictable up till now that I'm not taking anything for granted. We've got to work really hard for the next 3.5 weeks, because who knows what can happen.
Hillary Clinton will hold a private fundraiser here in Seattle. About 3,000 people are expected to attend. Tickets are up to $27,000. Ironically, Macklemore, who got famous singing about thrift shops, will do the introduction at another pricey event for a campaign that has already raised well over $500 million. Heather?
Well, she's right about that. Who knows what will happen in this election? That is for sure. Dan Springer, live for us in Seattle. Dan, thank you. John?
Yep.
Let's drill down a bit more on these Fox News polls. In the two-way matchup, it's Clinton over Trump by 8, 49 to 41%. Clinton had a 4-point edge just a week ago. Among women, Clinton is ahead by 19 points in the four-way race, 51 to 32%. But among independents, voters are split, giving 35% each to Clinton and Trump. However, Trump was up by 12 points among independents in late September. Let's bring in Glenn Hall, U.S. News editor for the Wall Street Journal. Independence is where you win presidential races, right?
Especially when you're a Republican right now. Just the way the Electoral College map is positioned, you need to bring those independents in to win states like North Carolina and Ohio and elsewhere. And if he can't bring them in, that could be a real problem for the campaign in the final weeks.
We talk a lot about the national number. She's up by 8 if you make it a two-person race. But it's not a national election. It's a series of state elections, and the Electoral College is going to figure this out. So when you look at states like North Carolina, Ohio, other battleground states, who's got the advantage right now?
Well, in the polls, we're seeing Donald Trump actually up by 1 percentage point in Ohio. That's our most recent WSJ NBC Marist poll. But in North Carolina, Clinton is ahead by 4 percentage points. We've seen the races a little bit closer in Florida, for example, than they are in Pennsylvania and Virginia. So there's still an opportunity for Donald Trump. If he can win back some of those supporters that are still on the fence, and he can take North Carolina, he's got to take Ohio, he's got to get more of the swing states and Democrat and the battleground states than Hillary Clinton does to make it through.
A couple of interesting nuggets in our polls. He used to have much more enthusiastic voter support. That's pretty much evened out now between Trump and Clinton. And then there's a question of whether they are honest and trustworthy. For Trump, the number is 32%. Roughly a third of voters think he is honest and trustworthy. That's a 4-point drop for him since last week. 63% and 64% say neither Clinton nor Trump is honest and trustworthy. But those are our choices, Glenn, basically.
That is a different kind of swing as well, because that used to be Hillary Clinton's Achilles heel, that honest and trustworthy category, and was a point of strength for Donald Trump. So this should be some concern for the camp. We're going to see how the Trump campaign adjusts in order to try to win back and overcome some of these obstacles that they've hit the last couple of weeks. And they've been pretty significant obstacles. You know, you saw in the poll numbers, your poll today, how many categories of women, including GOP women, have turned away from Donald Trump as a result of all of this challenge to how he treats women.
Well, the polls don't matter if you listen to his running mate. Mike Pence was on Fox and Friends this morning. Here's what he had to say.
That's the old cliche. The only poll that really matters, they finish up on November the 8th. Sure. I think these polls have been all over the map. But I honestly think that there's something missing in the polling these days.
What do you mean?
Well, it's just, I think Donald Trump has made a connection to the frustrations and the aspirations of everyday Americans like no one in my lifetime since Ronald Reagan. When you see against this avalanche, present company accepted here at Fox News, but this avalanche of negative media coverage that goes chasing after every potential negative story about Donald Trump every day, and still you see tens of thousands of people coming out and rallying. There's a determination out there across the country to change the direction in this nation.
They both have negative information coming out about them right now, but the media are paying a lot more attention to Trump. We'll get into that with a media panel in a second, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that, there's still opportunities for negative information to come out on the Hillary Clinton side. We still have a lot of emails to go through. There's a lot more information in there, and we've continued to see evidence of that closeness to the White House and how they may have tamped down some of the email server controversy or helped to avoid that. So there are still negatives out there. They've been overshadowed lately by the Trump news, but they're still out there.
Glenn Hall is U.S. News editor at the Wall Street Journal. Glenn, thank you. And for the first time, a Fox News anchor will be moderating a general election presidential debate. Award-winning journalist Chris Wallace will moderate the all-important final debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's a make-or-break event less than 3 weeks before the historic election of 2016. It'll be held October 19th in Las Vegas. The best place to watch the first Fox moderated debate, of course, right here on Fox News Channel.
Absolutely. Well, a minor problem is causing major delays today. United Airlines goes offline. The status of those affected flights, we'll tell you about that next. And the Clinton campaign claiming that Russia is trying to influence our 2016 election, suggesting that some of those hacked emails may not even be real. We'll take a closer look at that. And we want to hear from you. Do you agree with Donald Trump that the media is conducting a character assassination against him? Our live chat's up and running. Just go to foxnews.com/happeningnow to join in on the conversation. We'll be right back.
President and a former president making appearances there today. There's President Obama speaking to a crowd in Cleveland trying to rally support for Hillary Clinton. And on the right of your screen at that podium, her husband, former President Bill Clinton, will be speaking to the faithful in Delaware, Ohio. We'll keep an eye on both of those events. If either one of these speakers makes news, we'll bring it to you here on Fox.
First thing on WikiLeaks, I mean, the FBI and the Director of National Intelligence has said this is hacking, that Russians are behind it. The Russian government is behind it. So anybody that would hack to try to destabilize an election, you can't automatically assume that everything in all of these documents are even real.
And that is the line that the Clinton camp is now pushing as we get new information on the release of thousands of hacked emails from John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. Podesta blaming Russian intelligence for the illegal breach of his account just days after the Obama administration accused Russia of attempting to interfere with our elections. Joining us now, Morgan Wright, cybersecurity analyst and senior fellow at the Center for Digital Government. Morgan, great to see you as always. So I want to ask you about this because the Director of National Intelligence and the FBI both say that they are confident that Russia authorized this hacking. You're in agreement with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This has to happen at the highest levels, just as it had to happen at the highest levels for the NSA to intercept Angela Merkel's conversation. So anytime it's a head of state or a national election like this, you have to believe that somebody knows that has the authority to approve.
Okay, so remember this early in September, U.S. intelligence had warned that we believed that Russia was going to try to interfere with this presidential election. And we didn't exactly know how or why. Some were concerned that they would somehow rig the voting. But why do it this way when they're exposing information to the public?
Because it's an avalanche, it's a tsunami of information that you have to deal with, and then it keeps coming out. Look, right now, U.S. Cyber Command, NSA, I was just at a briefing with the Deputy Director of the NSA, and they talked about the elections. You've got that, the FBI, DHS. They're all watching the electronic systems. They're watching the network. That's going to be tough to do. This is easy because they've already got the emails. They've already got the materials. Now it's that drip, drip, drip of release, and you know what? The media has to cover this because there could be the smoking gun in there, so nobody does not want to cover it. They have to still look through it, and this is one of the ways that you can manipulate public opinion. You can influence it. Now, influencing it is one thing, Heather, but if they change the votes, that's manipulation.
That a whole lot of media outlets aren't covering, they're not covering the WikiLeaks stuff the way they are covering the Donald Trump scandal, so to speak.
And you know that's why I love doing ones and zeros, not R's and D's. You know, the political pundits will go on to that, but look, the information is there. There is. I know the Senator Kaine talked about some of this stuff could be changed. That's pretty improbable because we're talking 50,000 plus emails. If you wanted to alter something, it would be the tax returns that were released on Donald Trump. That could be forged. You could create consistency, but when you've got 50,000 emails, it's very difficult to change 10 of those, much less 50,000, and keep all the threads in order and the language and the context. So this is pretty legitimate. I think they're going to have a lot to deal with. And look, if they're not covering it, shame on them. They should be covering it because there's information in here and that's part of Russia's plan too. It's to influence, not manipulate. They're not going to manipulate the vote, but they're going to influence public opinion, which will then get you to change your vote when you go there on November 8th or before.
Except that might not happen if you're reading the polls about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But nevertheless, we'll let you stick with the zeros and ones. So let me ask you about this part, because one of the things that the Clinton camp is saying that only negative information is being released about Clinton and that Donald Trump, they claim, is in cahoots with the Russians. Is there any evidence to back that up?
I don't know because I don't have access to classified information anymore, but I would think that would be improbable. And I don't think, and if it was, I'd obviously be shocked, and I think that would be an automatic disqualifier if there was collaboration between the two. Look, Julian Assange has made a reputation about not collaborating really with anybody. He's probably getting this information from the Russians, no doubt about that. So I think the real problem is not Russia. The real problem is the people who've been writing these emails that are now wondering what else is going to come out. That's the real problem, and it's poor security, Heather. It's these poor security security practices that are getting us to where we are. So don't blame the email. Don't blame Donald Trump. Blame your own practices, and you got to start holding people accountable for poor security. And just don't write the email. That's one way to solve this.
And what's so interesting is that you say also, don't blame WikiLeaks, don't blame Russia, blame the U.S. government for not having stronger controls over their computers. And if you think about the OPM attack, Office of Personnel Management, and all of those things, that is evidence of that. All right. Well,
Heather,
got to get those folks fixing it.
Absolutely.
All right. Morgan Wright, great to see you as always, and thanks for your expertise. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Bet.
John?
Right now, United Airlines is getting back on track after a computer outage delayed flights all around the world. Passengers reporting delays of up to 6 hours on Thursday after two separate issues. The first with the airline's baggage weighing system. The second problem remains unclear, but this morning the airline says all systems are running smoothly and delayed flights have resumed. Nearly a week after Hurricane Matthew stormed ashore, communities in eastern North Carolina are still paying a terrible price. We'll have an update on the relentless and deadly floodwaters from the Fox Extreme Weather Center. Plus, U.S. warships on high alert off the coast of Yemen after rebels take aim. And now Iran is on the move as well. Community flooded by Hurricane Matthew. It's Princeville, one of the nation's oldest towns chartered by African Americans. After a flyover of the devastation, Governor Pat McCrory said the state's death toll stands at 22 and the rivers are still rising. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean live in the Fox Weather Center with more. Janice.
Hi, John. Yeah, we're still dealing with waters that continue to rise and won't start receding until this weekend. Of course, because of Hurricane Matthew, we had over 16 inches of rainfall in parts of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, up towards Virginia. Still flood advisories in effect as we see those rivers out of their banks and people are still suffering. I think if we weren't really into politics, this would be a lead story, so I'm glad we're still covering it. The good news is we don't have a lot of rainfall in the forecast over the next several days. Speaking about hurricanes, Hurricane Nicole didn't make a landfall, but affected Bermuda yesterday as a Category 3 storm, 120-mile-per-hour sustained winds. Some of the images coming out are quite destructive. The good news is this is moving north and east out in the Atlantic and is not going to cause any problems, just some rough surf and some rip currents along the east coast. And another tropical connection, if you can believe it, we have what was a typhoon in the western Pacific that is going to affect the Pacific Northwest this weekend. Several storm systems moving in, but amazing that this is part of a typhoon, was a tropical system, and we could see in excess of 80 to 100 mile-per-hour winds across the Northwest, the northern Rockies, in towards Northern California. So this is going to be a big event for them. Not only the wind gusts, but we could see upwards of 2 feet of rainfall and 2 feet of snow in the highest of elevations combined with these systems moving in to the Northwest this weekend. The highs today, cooler air across the Northwest, of course, but we've got warm conditions. Still feels like summertime across the southern plains, cooler across the Great Lakes, and the Northeast. It's feeling like fall as well. John Scott, I know you like the sound of snow. You are a skier, so I will keep you posted on all things Colorado and skiing.
Please do, because it sounds like it's going to be a great year.
I hope so.
All right. Thanks,
okay.
Jen.
You got it. And I'll join you, John.
All right.
Skiing in Colorado. Sounds great. All right. 25 minutes after the hour, after getting devastated by Hurricane Matthew, Haiti is getting some help as aid starts to flow into that country. Convoys from the United Nations and flights from the USS Iwo Jima now reaching shore with food, clean water, and materials to start the difficult process of rebuilding there. Hundreds of American Marines are helping in on that relief mission as our guys and gals do best. But many storm victims are still waiting, especially in the more isolated regions of Haiti. Nearly 500 people are now confirmed dead after Hurricane Matthew pounded that Caribbean nation. Officials say that death toll will much likely go higher. John?
Well, UVA's defamation trial against Rolling Stone magazine set to begin in a few days. But the magazine, which retracted a discredited story about a rape on the UVA campus, wants the trial postponed. Our legal panel weighs in on the reasons for their proposed delay and on this case. Also, Donald Trump reportedly taking an unorthodox approach in fighting a wave of sexual misconduct allegations. Our media panel takes a look. He's upping his attacks on the media. And Trump is also about to go after Mexican billionaire and New York Times shareholder Carlos Slim. claiming that Slim is part of a global conspiracy working with the Clinton campaign against him. Let's bring in our media panel. Judith Miller is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, author, and Fox News contributor. Betsy Woodruff is political reporter for the Daily Beast. All right, so Betsy, Carlos Slim, pretty well known in Mexico. Not that many Americans probably know the guy's name. He owns about 17% of the New York Times shares, as I understand it. When Donald Trump starts bringing him into the conversation, is that going to help?
I highly doubt it. And in fact, we have an interesting historic case study for using conspiracy theories to defend politicians against these kind of charges. Remember back in the 90s when Hillary Clinton suggested there was a vast right-wing conspiracy trying to destroy her husband. That didn't keep him from getting impeached. That did nothing to sort of resuscitate his reputation when he was going through an incredibly complicated time in his political life. Now, Donald Trump, oddly enough, seems to be using the same tactic, suggesting the media is in cahoots with the globalist billionaires trying to take him down, instead of simply asserting that the allegations he's facing aren't correct. He's not doing that, right? Well, he's not bringing forward evidence to exonerate himself, and it's perplexing.
He has said that it's not true and it's a bunch of lies, but he does spend more time attacking the messenger than trying to disprove the message. Apparently that is coming. Judy, you know, the media do not have a particularly high rating in this country. I think lower than Congress, right, last I checked. So by attacking the media, you hear it at Trump's rallies. When he attacks the media, boy, he gets a large roar of approval. Is that effective?
Absolutely, and it's one of the memes of his campaign. It's one of the themes that has driven him to his current success. But now, live by the media, die by the media. I mean, he wrote a letter to the New York Times, my former newspaper, demanding that the Times retract the stories it wrote about the women who claimed that they had been groped and abused by him. And basically, the New York Times lawyer, in one of the strongest rebuttals I've ever seen from my former paper, said, basically, bring it on. I mean, we were publishing information that was checked out, that we gave Mr. Trump an opportunity to reply. It is an issue of national importance. Don't even think about suing us, and if you do, we welcome that debate. But this is very consistent, John, with Donald Trump themes, especially the attack on Carlos Slim, who is, of course, a Mexican. So Mexicans are part of this great conspiracy, along with, you know, bankers, media elite. These are all subliminally anti-Semitic themes, by the way, that play so well with his base.
Trump has, spent a fair amount of time attacking Bill Clinton, suggesting that the allegations that have been lobbed at him could also be lobbed in the direction of the former president. Vice President Joe Biden was asked about that, whether Bill Clinton's past actually matters. Listen.
No, it shouldn't matter. Look, I can't make any excuses for Bill Clinton's conduct. And I wouldn't attempt to make any excuses for the conduct. But he paid a price for it. He paid a price. He was impeached. And he expressed his deep sorrow and acknowledged what he did. This guy, as I said, has acknowledged that he has been a sexual predator. He's acknowledged that he's abused his power. And as I said, the textbook definition of what constitutes sexual assault.
So, Betsy, does bringing Bill Clinton into the conversation, does that help Trump?
You know, I think it's unlikely that it will give him the boost that he needs. Part of the reason for that, of course, is that Trump's running against Hillary Clinton. But then on top of that, the fact is that most Americans already know about what Bill Clinton did in the 90s. They're aware of the Lewinsky scenario. They're aware of the impeachment. It's baked in. The folks who were going to oppose Hillary Clinton because of Bill Clinton's behavior already oppose her. Swing voters who are on the fence know about it, and it's not enough to move them in one direction or the other. And in fact, Republican political operatives have tested out campaign ads and messaging points criticizing Hillary Clinton for standing by Bill Clinton during that whole experience, and those criticisms just don't work. The reality is that, especially given the WikiLeaks emails that have come out, Trump has an abundance of arguments he can make against Hillary Clinton. The Republican Party has massive opposition research books targeting her specifically. The fact that Trump is now acting like he needs to take down Bill Clinton is just another example of his campaign getting sort of distracted by things that aren't aren't completely germane. The reality is that Hillary Clinton, as we know, is an incredibly flawed candidate. In the emails, we see progressive writers saying, look, she has a major problem here. We saw Neera Tanden, the president of the Center for American Progress, saying that apologies were Hillary Clinton's Achilles heel. Looking into how the Democratic Party talked about her, it's clear there are all sorts of avenues for attack that Republicans can use. Trump deciding to go after Bill Clinton, just from a strategic perspective, probably isn't going to be that effective.
The coverage, though, that Trump is getting for some of his statements and speeches versus the coverage that Hillary is getting for the email information that's coming out on WikiLeaks, Judy, not at all even. I just wonder if the press are taking sides, or is Trump's behavior that much more germane or interesting, especially when, given some of the new information that's coming out on the Clinton campaign via WikiLeaks.
Well, I have to agree with Betsy. I mean, he has made himself and his conduct the story. He has made his attitude towards women the story. Every time public attention shifts to the content of those emails, he says something that absolutely requires that cameras turn back to him. This is vintage Trump. It's the vintage narcissism that we've seen from this candidate, which just must drive his campaign crazy. The people trying to make him stay on message. I think this is another sign of a campaign in absolute free fall, being deserted by senior Republican donors, being deserted by senior Republican politicians. Mr. Trump is on his own, which is where he wants to be, and I don't think it's going to work, but the people will decide.
Well, he's not that far behind in the national polls, but we have less than 4 weeks to go. Judy Miller, Betsy Woodruff, thanks.
Thanks, John.
Sure thing.
Right now, Rolling Stone magazine wants to postpone the defamation trial over its discredited story about a rape that allegedly took place on UVA's campus. Now, the magazine, you may recall, had to retract its report over inaccurate reporting. That trial is scheduled to begin on Monday, but tonight, the UVA Dean of Students, who is now suing Rolling Stone in a defamation case, is set to appear on the ABC program 2020. Rolling Stone says that interview and the leaks of the deposition video will influence potential jurors. Here's our legal panel to talk about it. Fred Pesce is a former federal prosecutor, attorney, and a veteran prosecutor. Welcome to you both. Fred, let me start with you. Tell me a little bit about the impact that this TV report could have on potential jurors.
Well, it's interesting, Heather. I mean, it's one thing for me to come on television, but it's another thing to talk about my cases, which are patent cases, so people don't really want to hear about it. What possessed this woman and her lawyer to release these deposition transcripts to ABC is beyond me. These cases are hard enough to win for the plaintiff as it is, and this makes it more difficult. And I think the argument that you're hearing, not the argument, I think the argument you're getting from Rolling Stone is that this is going to taint the jury pool. Now, if that's what they were trying to do, that wasn't very bright, and so ultimately the case will either get continued or it'll get transferred. But there was absolutely no reason to have done this. There was a protective order in this case. The judge had forbidden it. They could be held in contempt, and it was just dumb.
Yeah, Wendy, do you think that that she, the dean, Nicole Aramo, will be held in contempt for this?
Well, it depends on whether or not the judge believes that she was ultimately responsible. I mean, the allegation is that the plaintiff's team is making breaking news, and bad news travels fast. Whatever happened to the days where Friday afternoon was the place that you buried a news story, now it's the place that you drop a bombshell. And that's on the eve of trial, so that's fairly significant. But Heather and Fred, here's the problem. Where are they going to move the trial to? I mean, in the social media world we live in, there is no such thing as county borders that really would protect a jury from being tainted by this explosive news that's been leaked. And it's video testimony as well, which is far more impactful.
Now, the dean's legal team, Fred, let me direct this question to you, is arguing that that testimony was in fact public record and that it's okay to have released it to ABC News. Do you agree with that? Is that correct?
Again, Heather, I deal with these kind of really onerous protective orders in almost every one of my cases, and it depends on how the order was written. When you file pleadings with a court, they are public record. Anybody can go down to the courthouse. They can look into the pleadings. They can see what was filed. If you file DVDs, they can play the DVDs. So, it's hard to tell from the record that I read as to whether or not these people actually did this and actually violated the court order, or they just put in the transcripts, or they didn't put in the tapes. And so my problem with all this is that I think Rolling Stone's conduct was repugnant, and I was kind of, quite frankly, hoping that they would get their one-uppance with this, and I'm disappointed to see the plaintiff do this.
And Wendy, so she, meaning the dean, she's understandably upset. She says that Rolling Stone magazine defamed her and basically painted her as somebody who tried to discourage the alleged victim from coming forward. Do you think that she has a chance of winning this case against Rolling Stone and then holding that magazine accountable for its shoddy reporting?
Well, Heather, the reason that's such an important question is, remember that she's been held to be a limited purpose public figure, which means that she's going to have to prove actual malice. That's a far higher bar than perhaps if somebody were defamed that isn't in the public eye or doesn't have a position of some esteem, as this dean does. But given that, you know, your opinion is worth more than you think. That's really the key in defamation cases, because they're about the cost of a reputation. How badly was she defamed? How did it affect her business? And what is it worth? But that actual malice standard, that's a hurdle, and by no means is the fact that there is a sanction that's been imposed already, that's going to just make her charges a little bit harder to prove. But we live in a day and age where reputation is everything, so she has that going for her.
It sure is, and we'll be watching that report, and then the trial is supposed to start on, well, at least calling jurors to talk on Monday, so we'll be watching that one. Fred TC and also Wendy Patrick, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Heather. You too.
Well, gang violence is on the rise, and authorities say the reason is an unexpected one. We'll tell you about that next. Plus, markets, they could close out the week on a high note. Why investors are so bullish as they await remarks from Fed Chair Janet Yellen about a possible interest rate hike. What could it all mean for your 401k? Some new information about a spike in gang violence nationwide. Authorities say a surge in unaccompanied minors coming across the border are easy pickings for gangs. Doug McElway joins us live from Washington with more on that. Doug.
Hi, John. This is not really a new problem. The migration of unaccompanied minor children to the U.S. has been an ongoing issue ever since the Civil War in El Salvador began back in 1979. Half of that country's population fled to escape the violence there, many of them to the United States. But unaccompanied minor children, especially males, are vulnerable to gang recruitment because of the lack of structure in their lives, the lack of family in their lives. In fact, one of the two main Salvadoran gangs, the 18th Street Gang, got its start in a Los Angeles prison and grew back in El Salvador as Salvadoran prisoners were released and deported back home. In recent months, law enforcement is seeing a spike in gang recruitment and activity in cities across America, including here in suburban Washington.
They might come here without an extended family network, and I think that really is the prototype for the kind of person that might be recruited. Young, suffered trauma as a child, not in possession of a really extended or very firm family structure here. That means they're looking for something. And it means that they might be more attuned or more capable of violence simply because of what they've seen in their life.
Apprehensions of unaccompanied minor children spiked to about 5,800 in August of this year, the last month for which statistics are available. Last month, the spokesman for HHS told Fox News, quote, "In the last few months, screening procedures of children and sponsors has increased in their intensity, which we had not done previously." That is at least an indication that the feds are aware of this gang risk problem associated with unaccompanied childhood arrivals, even if they are not securing the border properly. John, back to you.
Doug McElway in Washington. Scary stuff. Thank you.
Iran is now making a move after an American warship struck back against rebels in Yemen. They had fired missiles at a U.S. Navy destroyer. And is the Pentagon now facing a proxy war with Iran? We'll ask that question.
We want to make crystal clear that if you threaten our forces, you threaten our ships, we will be prepared to respond.
It's endless shrimp at Red Lobster with another new flavor you never saw coming. Grilled, glazed, Korean barbecue shrimp. And try as much as you want of flavors like new Parmesan peppercorn shrimp. Just come in before it ends.
destroying radar sites along the coast in Yemen. Now, Yemen is situated along the Gulf of Aden, one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, and that's in part why this is so significant. Now, our launch was in response to an attempted missile attack on USS Mason by Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. Tom Jocelyn is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a senior editor of the Long War Journal. Welcome back. Always great to have you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Has the administration undersold just how involved we are in this war with Yemen and Iran?
Well, you know, go back to September 2014, and President Obama said that Yemen was basically a successful model for his counterterrorism strategy. This is the way he was going to contain al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and al-Qaeda and ISIS and all these groups, because we had a valuable local partner in Yemen who could fight these groups.
But that valuable local partner was then later,
just a few months after
in a failed coup attempt, was ousted.
Just a few months after that, President Hadi lost his control of the government. These Houthi rebels who were backed by Iran swept through much of Yemen, took over much of the territory, and this fueled a new crisis that's basically been going on for the last 2 years. So what we see in Yemen is basically an example of where the U.S. has tried to rely on its local partners to be the front of this war, and it's failed.
But it's a failed state, so we can't rely on them. So then we're backing the Saudis, and the Saudis, they're involved in airstrikes and all of that, but this is now coming, sort of blowing back in our faces as they're going after our men and women on our ships.
Right, and you know, you look back at the President Obama's diplomacy with Iran, for example, and a key tenet you see pops up in his thinking and Ben Rhodes' thinking and other administration officials is somehow Iran could be our partner against the Sunni jihadists. Well, Yemen is a great example of why that's wrong.
We're basically fighting a proxy war with Yemen.
That's right.
I mean, excuse me, with Iran.
Yemen is a great example of why that's wrong. Iranian-backed Houthis destroyed our counterterrorism partnership with the local government and threw the country into a further flux and basically have created this new crisis. And the Houthis and all of Iran's proxies throughout the region are intrinsically anti-American. They're not on our side. They're against us. And that's why you see stuff like with these recent missile strikes against the USS Mason trying to hit U.S. warships. This is a great example where Iran's partners, Iran's proxies, are not our allies.
Okay, and many of us will remember the pallets of cash going to Iran in exchange for our prisoners. Money's fungible. Is it likely, or how likely is it that that money that we sent to Iran is paying for these shots at our ships?
Well, see, here's the point. You just made the key point. Money is fungible. So even if the direct dollars aren't going to the Houthis or one of the other Iranian proxies throughout the region, it takes the pressure off of Iran not to have to pay for domestic projects, something along those lines. So the question is, you know, the theory was that the Iranian regime was having in the middle of a domestic crisis. Well, if you're infusing them with a bunch of money or cash, that takes away from the domestic crisis, allows them to afford basically everything they're trying to do throughout the region.
So what's the big picture here? If this continues to go on, we fire shots at them, we take out their radar, they fire shots at us. What does this escalate into, if anything?
The bottom line is that anti-American actors are on the march throughout the region, whether it's on the Iranian Shiite side or the Sunni side. Yes, ISIS has lost ground on the Sunni side, but other anti-American actors like al-Qaeda and other jihadi groups are on the rise. You see with the Shiites with the Houthis and the Iranian-backed proxies, they're on the march. You know, in Iraq, for example, we see that, you know, ISIS is losing